Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives, all of them related to the Donald Trump-Kim Jong-un summit in Singapore that took place pretty much overnight, United States time. We'll get to that in just a moment. Jim joins us by phone today. He's headed to do some work over at CNN. Jim, as challenging as it is to get North Korea to actually honor commitments, getting to the studio on the day of the Washington Capitals championship parade might be even tougher.
Greg, I may very well be phoning it into CNN. We'll see how things go with the parade traffic.
Exactly. All right, well, let's get on to this. I think everybody knows that June 12th was the big day. It's still June 12th here, but about 12 hours ago, a little more than that, is when the summit took place. There's some good stuff, there's some not so good stuff, and there's some really disturbing stuff. So we'll get to all of it. Jim, let's start briefly with the good martini. The good news here is that the Trump administration came through on its promise not to ease sanctions or even promise to ease sanctions, although they do want to establish at some point some framework for economic ties. But at this point, before Kim Jong-un, who has now agreed to a pathway to denuclearization, which I guess on some level is good, if he actually follows through on that, of course. But the president is not easing sanctions in exchange for the promise. He's actually going to wait to see if it actually happens. So that's good. And though it's not in the written deal, Trump also says that Kim Jong-un agreed to dismantle a missile testing program. So on those fronts, we can definitely say that's good, right?
Yeah, to give the optimistic assessment, Greg, if Kim Jong-un really means what he's saying, and if Trump is accurately characterizing what Kim Jong-un agreed to and Kim Jong-un's intentions and his vision for North Korea down the road, then give him the Nobel. Then this really is an enormous breakthrough. And there is a possibility that the summit process of having these summit meetings, of the pomp and the circumstance and the crowds cheering him on the streets of Singapore, yes, it feeds the ego of Kim Jong-un, but it also kind of says to him, look, you can get more of this when you make these sorts of concessions, when you stop making the threatening rhetoric, when you stop doing the test firing of the missiles, you stop testing nuclear weapons, the world is willing to love you, and you can be a major player on the world stage. And, that Trump is not going to refuse to speak to you. In fact, Trump seems quite eager to speak with you, to the point where he's talking up the possibility of developing condos on North Korean beaches. This is, the possibility of a peaceful future and an end to hostilities, an end to the North Korean war. Boy, there are enormous prospects here, and I don't think there's any. If Kim Jong-un can and should be able to see, the Trump administration is willing, maybe even eager, to get things down that path. The question is, does Kim Jong-un really want it, and is Kim Jong-un willing to make the concessions necessary to really get down that path? And maybe that's a good segue into our not-so-good martinis.
Yeah, and that's why I think keeping the sanctions in place is our best hope here, because a lot of reports are out there that they really are having an effect and that Kim Jong-un is desperate for cash. And if Trump doesn't ease up until there's actually some progress on denuclearization or perhaps complete, that is great leverage, hopefully. All right, let's move on to the actual bullet points of the deal that the two leaders signed here. Number one, the United States and North Korea commit to establish new U.S.-North Korean relations in accordance with the desire of the peoples of the two countries for peace and prosperity. Okay. The United States and North Korea will join their efforts to build a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Again, very vague. Number three, reaffirming the April 27th, 2018 Panmunjom Declaration. The North Koreans commit to work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That's good, but it's work toward complete denuclearization. And this is language we saw a lot. That's very similar to what Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton hammered out with Kim Il-sung back in the early to mid-1990s. And, of course, North Korea has welched on that agreement and many others in the 20-plus years since then. And number four, the United States and North Korea commit to recovering POW MIA remains, including the immediate repatriation of those already identified. And here's one more that didn't make the deal. Trump was speaking with Greta Van Susteren, who now apparently works for Voice of America. She met him right in front of those flags, and we'll talk about the flags in a little bit too. But she asked him about what it means for the U.S. military posture in South Korea.
What about our troops? Are they staying in South Korea?
Yeah, they're going to stay. We didn't even discuss that. That wasn't discussed. We are going to get out of the war games that cost so much money, because I think, number one, it's very provocative, and I want to do it, and I think they're very happy about it because it is so provocative, but it costs a fortune to do it, and we won't do that as long as we're negotiating in good faith.
So, Jim, we give up a concrete concession, and for the president to use North Korea's words of provocative certainly makes the stomach turn there. But then again, we've got no details, no specifics on what path towards denuclearization means. There's no talk about inspections, verification, or anything else. It's more of the same with North Korea.
Yeah. On Twitter this morning, I was arguing with some people who were insisting, oh, my goodness, we've never seen anything like this before. Well, actually, we've seen things like this quite a few times. If you bother to take a look at North Korean history, you'll see that since the mid-1980s, they've pledged to denuclearize or renounced nuclear weapons a good 6 or 7 times. And every one of them was as seemingly authentic as this one. And then, of course, North Korea went back on its word, or arguably never intended to keep its word. Getting them to make the promise is not in and of itself that hard. And I think a lot of Trump fans really want to act like, no, this is some sort of major achievement here. They'll promise anything. It's the verification that's a real issue. And I think, it's tough to say, to overstate how difficult it is to be able to verify whether North Korea is keeping its promises in nuclear disarmament and denuclearization, because this country is a black box, so to speak. This is the most secretive regime in the world, the most paranoid regime in the world, tons of underground bases. Back when we had the very limited inspection regime that we did, we don't know what we don't know. Like, we don't know what's in every chamber of every building of every underground base that they've built. So even if they actually agree to a certain amount of inspections, and we know from the Iran deal how tough it is to get a country to give full and unfettered inspections. You may remember the arguments of Saddam Hussein after the Persian Gulf War and all of that. But even then, there's always the possibility that they've got some sort of secret aspect of the program or secret facilities that we don't even know about. So the idea of verifiable denuclearization is a really, really tough goal to get at the very best of circumstances. To hear Trump say that the U.S. military exercises with the South Koreans and the Japanese is provocative, is to basically directly echo North Korean propaganda. I don't think training with our allies is provocative. And to the point that it is could be construed as provocative, it is that, a deterrence to North Korea to say, look, if you guys dare try to start a conflict, and remember, this is a regime that has sank South Korean ships without warning. They have shelled artillery at South Korean territory and islands without warning. The North Korean regime's idea of rattling the saber is to take it out of the sheath and stab you. Okay, this is not a regime that easily understands or plays along with, recognized international rules of using military force and things like that. So one of our ways of deterring them from doing something stupid that could lead to an all-out war is to do these kind of exercises, to do them, if not quite right up on their doorstep, then not too far away, so that they know that if there is a military conflict, they will suffer terrible, terrible losses. Well, we're not going to do that anymore, apparently. And, I've always felt, thinking back to the Reagan days, that one of the core components of U.S. national security strategy is, if you want peace, prepare for war. If you are ready for a fight, people are less eager to fight you. That is the concept of deterrence, right? Trump seems to sound like he's very eager to get rid of that as a cost-saving measure. Now, look, we wouldn't be spending the money doing these exercises if the Pentagon did not think they were worthwhile. So this was, all of this is the bad aspect of the deal and the summit and the meeting, along with some of the other things that Trump had said about the people in North Korea really love him. Well, yes, they love him because if they don't love him, they go to a prison camp or die. There's an enormous amount of legitimization of Kim Jong-un and the regime, the handshake, the smiles, everything about this. Look, maybe this is a necessity of diplomacy, but you end up legitimizing this regime on the world stage beyond the wildest dreams of Kim Jong-un. the administration really did treat this, and the Singapore government hosting it, as if this was a Reagan-Gorbachev summit. This is a meeting of the superpowers, except North Korea is not a superpower. It is a rogue state, or as Madeleine Albright said before her visit in 2000, a state of concern. This is basically rewarding bad behavior. You could see the meeting as a form of agreeing to kind of the blackmail of the bad behavior of the regime. And you have to wonder, does every other regime on the globe that is thinking about that wants to get concessions from the United States take notes and understanding? If you have nuclear weapons, all of a sudden the United States of America has to treat you like an equal. And that's a way to get respect and power on the world stage.
Yeah. The little blending there from our bad to our crazy. So let's get a little more specific on some of the things that happened in addition to what Jim just mentioned. You did have the handshake in front of the flags, and Jonah Goldberg had quite the tweet about that yesterday, saying that the North Korean flag, I think, should disintegrate into ashes if it ever comes into contact with the American flag. It's just vile that they're even standing there next to each other. Then there was when they were at the table with Trump was there with Pompeo and Bolton and the interpreter and John Kelly, right across from Kim Jong-un, and repeatedly Trump said it was such a great honor to meet with Kim Jong-un. Then at his press conference, he referred to Kim as, quote unquote, very talented, and, quote, anybody that takes over a situation like he did at 26 years of age and is able to run it and run it tough. I don't say he was nice. And then, of course, you mentioned the comment he made about the way the people feel about Kim Jong-un. Here's what he told Greta Van Susteren about that.
What surprised you today about Kim Jong-un?
Really, he's got a great personality. He's a, funny guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a great negotiator. He loves his people. Not that I'm surprised by that, but he loves his people.
No, he doesn't. I mean, nothing could be more obvious than that. As plenty of people have pointed out, North Korea is essentially one giant gulag. And, Jim, even if Kim Jong-un weaseled out what he wanted to in the language of the deal, what he got in optics and in comments from President Trump is worth far more to him politically, and it's a huge loss for the repressed people of North Korea.
I was going to say, Greg, was that audio from The Bachelor or something? Where he says, "Oh, he's got a great personality. He's charming. He's smiling. I'm going to give him a rose." It was bizarre. I realize there's a certain amount of Trump verbal autopilot boilerplate about great honor to meet him and all kind of stuff. And people want to say it's a historic summit. Yes, it is historic. We might argue that it's bad history, but look, if all of this worked to get North Korea to make concessions, fine, great, I'll go with it. I think the characterization of the regime was one of the most troubling aspects of this whole thing. The idea that we were going to turn a blind eye. One of the things is that in the past, the irony is everyone doesn't like angry Trump and how everyone feels frightened when he sends his angry tweets at Rocket Man. But at least at that point, Trump seemed to be characterizing the regime accurately, right? I mean, this was a brutal regime. This kind of got started. Remember, I want to say, what is Otto Warmbier's family thinking this morning? This is getting into our crazy martini, Greg. My thinking was, if you really want to get down to crazy, last night, it's around prime time, kids are in bed, I'm on the couch with my wife. I'm like, I'm going to tune in to CNN to see what's going on with the summit. I knew at the time difference was going on right around the time of the evening. And, Greg, I don't know if you were watching, but all of a sudden I turn on, and it's Dennis Rodman in his pot shirt wearing the Make America Great Again hat, and he's crying over the death threats he received the last time he traveled to North Korea. And, Greg, as far as I know, I've never taken LSD. I figure that's what it feels like. I figure that's what the perception must be. You're seeing things and you recognize them, but they make no sense in the context that they are in. So out of a long, crazy process, you and I have taken a lot of shots at Chris Cuomo on CNN over the years. He's not our favorite newscaster, but he had this look of befuddled incredulity throughout the entire interview. And I was like, wow, Chris Cuomo, tonight, I feel you. I feel your pain, brother. I know exactly how you feel because I'm feeling the same thing watching what you're watching right now.
What do you think was going on with his facial expression? Was it, I can't believe I have to talk to this guy at all, or I have no idea what he's saying and doing right now?
Well, they brought on former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, on right afterwards, Greg, and I assume he was on there to provide some sort of intelligence analysis. maybe some NSA code-breaking ability to figure out whether there was some hidden message in Dennis Rodman's statement. What we really did see as a defeat here, Greg, is that for a long time there was a philosophy in American foreign policy that you didn't reward bad behavior, you didn't give regimes. A meeting with the U.S. president is a prestigious thing. That there is great value in that. Not every the president's a busy man. He doesn't get to meet with every foreign leader all the time. And so if you're going to if a hostile state wants that, well then if you want that, that's the carrot. You guys got to make some concessions to get that. You guys have to do something we like in order to do that. You might argue that the North Koreans sort of did that with releasing the American prisoners. Of course, they weren't supposed to take those American prisoners in the first place, so I'm not so sure that really represents a giant concession on their point. Back in 2007, Barack Obama was in a then senator, it was a Democratic presidential primary debate, and an audience member asked him, will you meet without preconditions with the leaders of, and I believe he said Syria, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and I believe Cuba. And he did a bunch of those. One of the ones he did not do was North Korea. And the argument of Obama was, yes, of course, there's all these good values of dialogue, blah, blah, blah. And the argument from the right, and at one point, pretty consistently across the right, was you don't give that away. You don't give them that without expecting some sort of concession in return. And, boy, oh boy, Kim Jong-un just got the most glamorous, high-profile celebration of himself and a potential partnership. The handshake, everything suggested that North Korea and the U.S. are equals. And that is an enormous elevation for North Korea, and one that I don't know if the administration look, if it all pays off in the end, great, it's worth it. But if it doesn't, if they break their word, as the North Korean regime has done so many times before, then effectively we've given that away in exchange for nothing.
Jim, you mentioned Obama's pronouncements back in 2008. I'm sure you've seen on Twitter and elsewhere a lot of smug Obama alumni, which is kind of redundant, I realize, saying how much more thorough they were, how much better verification regimes they put into place in the deal and so forth. And we've obviously expressed our misgivings here and our doubt that this is actually going to accomplish much, but we hope that it might someday. But that doesn't change the fact that the Obama-Iran nuclear deal is a smoldering piece of feckless wreckage that Trump was right to scrap.
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of this, it's something that the Trump administration should keep in mind, and folks in the previous administration and all future administrations should keep in mind, is that, shady, hostile regimes lie. They lie a lot. They lie quite easily. They will do elaborate ruses to make it appear as if they are agreeing and then not actually agreeing. If you don't, that this is at the core of their character. And I realize every lawmaker believes that they can be the one who can make some sort of great breakthrough, and they can get them to see reason, and they can get them to see their true self-interest and all that stuff. It very rarely works out the way you do. I was reading something, and somebody made an interesting point that, President Reagan and Gorbachev signed a lot of arms control agreements back in the second term of President Reagan. But in a way, what really made those agreements work was the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed, right? That basically his negotiating partners ceased to exist, and the new Russian government that replaced it more or less went along with them. If the Soviet Union had continued to exist, then maybe things would not have turned out so well. Maybe we'd be listing the Soviet Union as another one of those regimes that made promises and broke them or something like that. So this is why everything comes down to verification. And the whole point, the reason it's tough to get these regimes to agree to extraordinarily extensive inspection regimes is because they want to cheat. If getting these guys to keep their word was easy, these deals would have been reached a long time ago.
Exactly right. They're liars, and in both cases, I would say, we had virtually all the leverage, and I don't think we used it as effectively in either case as we should have. But time will tell. We will see. But color us skeptical. Jim, good luck on the air today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.